A few weeks ago, panic started swirling online across India. People rushed to petrol stations, forming massive queues, driven by a rumor that fuel pumps were about to run completely dry because Russia had suddenly banned oil exports. But the panic was based on a misunderstanding of how the global energy market actually works. Russia did not ban the export of crude oil. To understand what actually happened, we have to look at the oil supply chain. Extracting raw, unrefined crude from the ground is called upstream processing. Taking that raw sludge and refining it into usable liquids like petrol and diesel is known as downstream processing. Russia banned the refined downstream products. In a global economy that relies on ready-to-use fuel for immediate transport, a sudden ban on gasoline creates a much faster, sharper crisis than stopping the flow of crude. The actual policy implemented by Moscow is a strict embargo on gasoline exports, starting April 1st and running through at least the end of July. The Kremlin was forced into this position by targeted strikes on their domestic infrastructure. Ukrainian drones have been repeatedly hitting deep inside Russian territory, scoring direct hits on major oil storage and processing facilities. The damage from these fires is severe. Industry monitors estimate that these attacks have successfully knocked out roughly 40% of Russia's total oil export capacity. At the same time, Moscow is dealing with escalating shipping insurance costs due to Middle East conflict, a spike in domestic demand for spring agricultural planting, and fears that rising prices will trigger civilian unrest. Russia is locking down its borders to hoard its own fuel. By pulling millions of barrels out of the international market, they instantly created a massive supply vacuum, starving countries that lack their own refineries and rely on importing pre-refined petrol. India manages to sidestep the physical shortages caused by this ban because of how it buys energy. India primarily buys raw crude oil, shipping it across the ocean in massive bulk tankers. Once that crude arrives, India relies on domestic mega-facilities, like the Jamnagar refinery in Gujarat, to process the raw sludge into usable petrol and diesel right at home. Now, there is a persistent rumor that India only has about 9 days of oil left in reserve, but that metric refers exclusively to the government's Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which strictly holds unpumped, unrefined crude. When calculating fully refined petrol and diesel in commercial storage tanks, the actual domestic buffer is closer to 60 days, so India isn't going to run out of physical liquid, but is deeply exposed to the economic shockwaves tearing through the international market. With Russian petrol suddenly gone, global supply is tightening, and international prices for refined fuels are shooting up. This dynamic creates a very dangerous loophole. Indian refiners suddenly have a massive financial incentive to pack up the fuel they just processed and sell it to Europe or Southeast Asia for a premium, leaving Lobo gas stations dry. To prevent domestic companies from draining the country's fuel supply for overseas profits, the Indian government deployed an aggressive legislative tool called a Special Additional Excise Duty. This places a severe financial penalty on outgoing shipments. Refiners are hit with an extra tax of 21.5 rupees per liter on exported diesel and 29.5 rupees on jet fuel. But that penalty completely disappears if the companies sell the fuel inside India. It is a calculated hoarding strategy. By making it financially punishing to export, the government forces refiners to dump their product into the local market. This massive influx of local supply keeps domestic pump prices stable and under 100 rupees. The government explicitly targeted diesel with this tax because it is the absolute backbone of the Indian physical economy. Diesel runs the vast network of trucks and freight trains required to move commercial goods across the country. It powers the tractors and irrigation pumps required to survive the summer agricultural season. Jet fuel, or ATF, was similarly locked down to protect the entire aviation sector from crippling operational costs. If diesel prices spike, the cost of transporting every single physical product spikes with it. Protecting the diesel supply acts as a firewall against economy-wide inflation. Having successfully walled off its domestic supply from the global panic, India is now using its massive refining output as a tool for regional diplomacy. Neighboring Sri Lanka has been severely damaged by these exact supply chain disruptions, leaving citizens waiting for hours at filling stations just to get fuel for their daily commute. India quickly authorized the shipment of 38,000 metric tons of fuel directly to Colombo to stabilize their grid. This immediate relief effort generated widespread diplomatic goodwill, drawing public gratitude from Sri Lankan leadership and highlighting the fast-moving coordination by India's External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar. Energy security in a volatile world rests on two pillars: the industrial hardware to process raw crude internally, and the legislative will to ensure that fuel stays exactly where it's needed most.